The Secret of the Conde Hermanos, Chapter 18. Upon Alice's return from Carnival in Venice, she had the great good fortune of taking up residence at the Sovereign Hotel in Santa Monica. "Someone died," the landlord exclaimed excitedly. "Well, in the hospital, of course, not in the actual apartment," he continued in a more reserved tone, not wanting to unduly alarm a new tenant. But truth be told, that would not have deterred Alice one iota, or anyone else for that matter, on the Sovereign's lengthy waiting list, for it was quite often the only way one ever acquired a coveted, rent-controlled apartment in what had become the desirable West Side enclave. It had not always been thus. Having grown up there, Alice remembered when Santa Monica was simply a quaint little backwater town where one could never buy so much as a croissant or cappuccino without venturing quite far beyond its borders. And now such things were ubiquitous, available on every street corner, it seemed. How times had changed. "Helena, are you sitting down?" she whispered conspiratorially into the telephone receiver, wanting to share her good news with her best friend immediately. "Alice, my dear, mothers rarely have the luxury of sitting down. I'm spot cleaning the carpet, even as we speak, if you must know. However, I'm all ears for you. Have you finally won the lottery?" "The lottery pales in comparison to what I've won, Missy. I've made it to the top of the waiting list for the Sovereign Hotel. I signed the lease today. I'll probably never go to Europe again. I'll never need to." For it was true. The Sovereign exuded all the old-world charm of a bygone era, having been designed by the Hearst family's architect of choice, Julia Morgan, and it would not have looked out of place on the very grounds of Hearst Castle in San Simeon, her most illustrious commission for William Randolph himself. "Congratulations," Helena effused, grasping full well the unlikely odds of securing such an apartment, let alone at the Sovereign. She had known Alice since kindergarten, when they both attended the tiny Carl Thorpe School together on San Vicente Boulevard. Recently, they had both watched in horror as the original school, housed in what had once been a graceful, rambling Spanish Revival-style hacienda, was demolished before their very eyes. It had been deemed unsafe in the last earthquake a few years before, and like so many of the more elegant and historic structures in the area, doomed to make way for progress. If only progress were not so heartless and unaesthetic, one could only lament deeply in one's soul. But alas, it was a steamroller, flattening by degrees all that remained of a town once humbly dubbed a home to the newlywed and the nearly dead. "This calls for champagne," Helena continued, "or at the very least a bottle of sparkling Monterey County wine, of which I believe we still have a bottle lying around. Shall we meet you tonight around 6-ish? "That would be grand," Alice rejoined. "You're in the basement?" Helena exclaimed disparagingly, holding Blaze's hand while Lysander uncorked the wine and poured it into some paper cups they had brought along for the occasion. "Can they rent apartments in the basement, Alice? Is this all strictly on the up and up?" "Of course they can," Alice said dismissively. "Don't be a wet blanket, Nellie." She went on, using the childhood nickname Helena cared for not at all. "Besides, I'd take a basement apartment in the Sovereign any day over a penthouse just about any place else on earth. And don't forget the Pacific Ocean is exactly 1 block in that direction," she said, pointing a righteous finger directly in front of her, causing Blaze to point as well and say "ocean," as if for added emphasis. And in fairness, the apartment was not without a view of sorts, due to its exceedingly high ceilings surrounded by equally high windows that provided an ample view of the grass, the lower trunks of the trees, passing cars, and the lower extremities of pedestrians. It affords privacy, Alice sniffed defensively. Of course it does, Helena agreed, softening her tone, remembering how she and Alice had sat around the fireplace in the living room of the Carlthorpe School on rainy days so many years ago. The cozy living room was actually their kindergarten classroom, and as there had been only 6 children in their entire class, they had bonded tightly. So tightly it was that the following year, when Alice's parents had divorced and she was sent to boarding school in France, their friendship never wavered. They resumed it seamlessly every summer when Alice returned to spend 3 months with her father and new stepmother, who lived a few short blocks from Helena's family home. She always returned so gaunt, though, with dark circles under her eyes, causing Helena's mother to worry about what sort of gruel they had fed her at boarding school in France, or if she simply had refused to eat at all. It did seem, however, that her appetite returned with a vengeance when she crossed their threshold, and she continued to eat voraciously all summer like a caterpillar, storing lipids for its inevitable transformation into a mouthless monarch butterfly, when it too would be forced to live through the winter strictly on its fat reserves. "Let's have a toast," Lysander suggested congenially, raising his paper cup as Helena and Alice quickly followed suit. "We've all heard it said," he began, "a man's home is his castle. But in your case, Alice, it's more than a figure of speech. It's literally true. So here's to life in your castle, the Sovereign Hotel. May you experience a fairy tale existence here." "Is that such a good idea, Ly?" Helena could not help but wonder, thinking of poison apples and spinning wheels. "He meant in the happily ever after sense," Alice assured her. "You bet I did," Lysander concurred wholeheartedly. Meanwhile, several feral kittens could be seen through the windows, playing outside on the grass in the moonlight, and one of them peered in at the small gathering in the basement apartment with more than mild curiosity. When Alice arrived home a few short weeks later from what had become her morning constitutional, a walk along the twisting path in Palisades Park, which followed the contours of the meandering coastal bluffs, and from which she could see as far south as Palos Verdes, as far north as Point Doom, and on most days the clear outline of Catalina Island, which hovered near the horizon, she encountered a strange sound emanating from behind her refrigerator. It was a muted crying sound, coming from, as far as she could determine, somewhere inside the wall itself. She immediately called the maintenance engineer, who seemed to have some prior familiarity with the problem. After analyzing the situation briefly, he informed her it was a kitten, of which there were many who subsisted underneath the hotel. The kitten had apparently entered through a window that Alice had left open but a few inches and found its way to the cupboard beneath her kitchen sink, the door of which she had left ajar. From there, the kitten had discovered an inviting hole in the back of the wall, and crawling through had got stuck at a point behind the refrigerator, unable to go forward or back. He would have to pull out the refrigerator and make a small opening in the wall to release the kitten from its plight. It wouldn't take long, he assured her. It wasn't the first time he'd made such a rescue, evidently. True to his word, the procedure was over in no time, and Alice found herself face to face with a hungry, frightened tortoise-shell kitten who continued emitting high-pitched squeaks of alarm until Alice, having nothing else, appeased it with a saucer of milk which was lapped up greedily. "What should I do now?" Alice cluelessly asked the maintenance engineer. "Give it a good home, and for God's sake get it spayed or neutered," was his practical advice. "By the way, Here are a few things I found behind the refrigerator. Probably fell back there during the last earthquake a few years ago. That one was quite a shaker," he added as he handed her a brown paper shopping bag and headed out the door. Alone with her new charge, Alice decided a name would be the first order of the day, and after careful deliberation between two strong contenders, she eliminated Eliza Doolittle and went with Dulcinea. The kitten was, after all, loud and disheveled, but showed great promise, as did both considered namesakes. However, as her Uncle Jerry had been selected upon graduating from the San Francisco Conservatory years ago as the orchestral guitarist for the Broadway touring company of Men of La Mancha, he had passed down to her a deep love for what he considered the show's most poignant melody and the one in which the mysterious rhythm of the cigarillas could be quite clearly discerned, Dulcinea. And then, upon further remembering, having read somewhere that almost all tricolored cats were female, she deemed it the most suitable name for the unanticipated presence of this adventuresome new street urchin in her life.